welcome to a new episode, a new live lesson from your channel Pure English. So, in today's lesson, which is our lesson number 9, we are making this series of live lessons to tackle English grammar. And today's lesson, or today's live lesson, will be about the topic of phrasal verbs. As a matter of fact, phrasal verbs are very important, and they are one of the most powerful tools that you can use in order to raise the standard of your command of English. The fact of the matter is that native speakers use a lot of phrasal verbs in their speech and in their writing, which is the same thing that applies to idioms as well. So they use lots of idioms and they use lots of phrasal verbs, whether in written English or in spoken English. So in today's live lesson, we will be demonstrating, we shall be explaining all the ins and outs of the topic of phrasal verbs so that you can take a lot of notes and you can come up with lots of useful information regarding this topic, and hopefully you can utilize them in your speech and in your writing in order to have your command of English become more appealing whenever you deal in English, whether with native speakers or even with non-native speakers of the English language. Right, so without further ado, let's quickly dive into the topic because today's lesson will be a bit long in order to be able to cover all the entire lesson or all the entire theme or topic or subject of phrasal verbs. So, first of all, we need to define what a phrasal verb is. Well, it's called a phrasal verb. So, phrasal verbs at the end of the day are verbs. They are just verbs. They are not nouns. They are not adjectives. The part of speech or the word class that they belong to is verbs. But are they similar to normal verbs? Of course not. Because if they were similar to normal verbs, we wouldn't call them phrasal verbs. We would just call them verbs without having any label attached to them. But we call them phrasal verbs because they have certain characteristics which make them different from normal verbs. For example, a verb like work, this is not a phrasal verb. But if you look at another verb which is work out, this is a phrasal verb. And because it's a phrasal verb, most probably it will have a different meaning to the meaning of the original verb. So work is just do your job. If you work, this means that you do the job you're entitled to do or the job you're supposed to do. Whereas when you work out, which is the phrasal verb, it means that you do physical exercises, being at the gym, being indoors, being outdoors, or wherever. So when you change your normal verb, which is work, to a phrasal verb, which is work out, the meaning changes. And this is one of the main features of phrasal verbs, is that they differ in the meanings from the meanings of the original verbs or the main verbs making them up. Another example, a verb like take. Take is not a phrasal verb. If you take something, it means that it is somewhere or it is with someone and you take it from them. That's to take, yeah? To take something. But the phrasal verb take after has a completely different meaning. If somebody takes after somebody else, this means that they look like them, that they resemble them. So when I say that a boy, for instance, takes after his father, this means that this boy looks like his father or resembles his father, whether in personality or in appearance. So, excuse me. So as we could see, the normal verb, which is take, doesn't have the same meaning as the phrasal verb, which is take after. They have different meanings. However, with some cases, we may come across some phrasal verbs which have the same meaning as the meaning of the main verbs making them up or composing them. For example, a verb like grow. If somebody or if something grows, it means that they get bigger in size. Grow. If you add the preposition up to it, it becomes a phrasal verb, which is grow up, and it has the same meaning as the normal verb, which is grow. So we can say that the normal verb, grow, and the phrasal verb, grow up, they have the same meaning. In this case, we call the phrasal verb, grow up, for example, a literal phrasal verb. A literal phrasal verb. It becomes a literal phrasal verb because you can guess the meaning of the phrasal verb as it's similar or identical to the meaning of the original verb making it. Like in the case of grow. So grow, that's the main verb. Grow up, that's the phrasal verb. They have the same meaning. So we say that grow up is a literal phrasal verb, which means that it's guessable. You can guess its meaning. Whereas, on the other hand, another verb like take after, which is the verb we talked about a couple of minutes ago, take after in its meaning is completely different from the meaning of the main verb forming it, which is the verb take. Take and take after have completely distinct meanings. In this case, we say that take after is a figurative phrasal verb. A figurative phrasal verb, meaning that it's extremely hard to guess or to speculate the meaning of the phrasal verb from the main verb making it up, because the meaning of the phrasal verb in case of figurative phrasal verbs are completely different from the meanings of the main verb making them up. Right. So what makes a verb phrasal verb? As you could see in the case of work, when work changed into work out, it became a phrasal verb. When take changed into take after, it became a phrasal verb. So as you could see, apparently, what makes a verb phrasal verb is adding a preposition after it. So when you say take, that's a normal verb. Take after, that's a phrasal verb because there's a preposition or an adverb after it. Sometimes the word after the verb in the phrasal verb is a preposition, and in some other instances it is an adverb. So it could be both of them. Grammatically, in the technical jargon or in the grammatical jargon, which is the language of grammar, the word which comes after the main verb in the phrasal verb, we call it a particle. This particle could be a preposition or an adverb. All right. So simply, what makes a verb a phrasal verb is just adding a particle after the main verb, this particle being a preposition or an adverb. In some cases, however, the phrasal verb is composed of 3 words rather than 2. So instead of being formed of the main verb plus 1 particle after it, being a preposition or an adverb, what happens is we have 2 particles after it. For example, a verb like look forward to. Look forward to, which means if you look forward to something, it means that you want this something to happen so much. You're so excited about it. So when you say, for instance, I look forward to meeting you soon, I look forward to meeting you soon, this means that I want to meet you soon so much. I'm so excited about meeting you as soon as possible. So look forward to is an example of phrasal verbs in which the main verb, which is look, is followed by 2 particles, forward and to. Right. So now we are done with the with the definition of phrasal verbs. So again, just to recap on this section of the lesson before we go on to the next section, what makes a verb a phrasal verb? In order to change a normal verb into a phrasal verb, what you need to do is to add 1 or 2 particles after it. Sometimes your phrasal verb will be literal, meaning that you can guess the meaning of the phrasal verb, like in the case of the verb grow up, which is the same meaning as grow. So the phrasal verb and the main verb or the normal verb, they have the same meaning. But in some other cases, you have figurative phrasal verbs or metaphorical phrasal verbs, which means that the meaning of the phrasal verb is not guessable. You can't guess it because the meaning of the phrasal verb is completely different from the meaning of the main verb making it up or composing it. All right. So being verbs, talking about phrasal verbs, because they are verbs, they are either transitive or intransitive. Well, what does this mean? In English, all verbs are two types. Any verb in English must fall under one of these two categories. These are transitive phrasal verbs and intransitive phrasal verbs. So what's the difference? A transitive phrasal verb needs an object. It's used with an object in the sentence. Whereas an intransitive phrasal verb is a verb that can be used without an object. For example, when I say, Jessica grew up on a farm. Jessica grew up on a farm. As you can see, we don't have an object here. We have the subject, Jessica, and the verb, grew up, which is a phrasal verb, and a prepositional phrase after that to complete the meaning of the sentence, which is on a farm. So as you could see, the verb in this case, which is grow up, it doesn't take an object. It doesn't have an object. So it's an intransitive phrasal verb. Just like normal verbs. Normal verbs are either transitive or intransitive. Phrasal verbs also could be transitive or intransitive. Let's have another example of an intransitive phrasal verb. When she came to, she found herself at a hospital. Again, when she came to, comma, when she came to, comma, she found herself at a hospital. So what is the meaning of came to? That's a phrasal verb. Came, that's the main verb, followed by a preposition which is to, so that's a phrasal verb. What does it mean? If you come to, this means that you become conscious again after fainting. So you lost your consciousness for some time and then you woke up again. You regained your consciousness again. So when you come to, this means that you regain your consciousness after fainting for some time. So the example says, when she came to, she found herself at a hospital, which means when she regained her consciousness again, she found herself there. So as you can see, there is no object. The sentence says, when she came to, only without an object, when she came to, comma, she found herself at a hospital. So this is another example of a phrasal verb that's intransitive, meaning that it can be used or it has to be used without an object. On the other hand, many phrasal verbs are transitive, which means that they are used with an object. For example, when I say, I look up to my father. I look up to my father. So, where is the phrasal verb in this sentence? It's look up to. This is an example of a phrasal verb that consists of the main verb, look, plus two particles, look up to. Right. What is the meaning of that verb? If you look up to somebody, this means that you admire and respect them. You admire and respect them. So if I look up to my father, this means I admire and respect my father. Where is the object? My father. Where is the subject? I. So look up to is a phrasal verb which is transitive because it's used with an object in this particular sentence. I said, I look up to my father. So I is the subject, my father is the object, and look up to is the phrasal verb, which is composed of the main verb plus two prepositions. Right, so this is a similarity between normal verbs and phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs, just like normal verbs, could be transitive and could be intransitive and could be both. What does that mean? It means that your phrasal verb could be used transitively or intransitively. So, with many phrasal verbs, you can have an object after the phrasal verb, and you can have the phrasal verb without an object. You can use it as a transitive verb or as an intransitive verb. In this case, sometimes there's a difference in the meaning, and in some other cases, there is no difference. So for example, when I say, don't worry, I'll call back soon. Don't worry, I'll call back soon. Where is the phrasal verb? Call back. As you can see, we have the main verb, call, followed by one particle, which is back. Right? So you said in the sentence, I will call back soon. No object. It's an intransitive phrasal verb. And you can say, don't worry, I will call you back soon. Here we have an object, which is you. So I'm using the same phrasal verb in two sentences. One of them, the verb is transitive, and in the other, it's intransitive. So when I said, don't worry, I'll call back soon, I'm using the phrasal verb call back as an intransitive phrasal verb with no object in the sentence. And in the other example, when I said, I'll call you back soon, I'm using the verb call back as a transitive phrasal verb with an object in the sentence, which is the pronoun you. Okay, so your phrasal verb could be intransitive all the time, could be transitive all the time, or it could be used transitively and intransitively with no difference in meaning, just like in the case of call back. But many other phrasal verbs can be used transitively and intransitively with a difference in meaning. So your phrasal verb, which can be used in the two senses, being transitive or intransitive, sometimes the meaning won't change, but in many cases the meaning will change. For example, when I say, I cut out the picture from the magazine. I cut out the picture from the magazine. This means I have a magazine, which is some sort of a colored newspaper. And then there is a picture or an image in that magazine that I'm interested in. So what I do is that I cut it out, either with my fingers or with a pair of scissors. I cut it out. So I take this part of the page, I take this part of the magazine out by cutting it out, by removing it from the magazine using a pair of scissors. So here, cut out, which is the phrasal verb we're talking about here, cut out, we're using it transitively. Why? Because there is an object. Look at the example. I cut out the picture, or I cut the picture out from the magazine. Where is the object? The picture. Awesome. But you can use the same verb intransitively with a completely different meaning. Look at this example. The engine cut out. The engine cut out and the car stopped. The engine cut out and the car stopped. So what is the meaning of cut out in this example? If the engine or the motor of a vehicle cuts out, this means it stops functioning. It stops working suddenly. So if you're driving your car and then all of a sudden your car stops and it doesn't work, this means that the engine or the motor of the car has cut out. So it's the same phrasal verb, which is cut out, but the meaning is completely different. So when cut out is transitive, it means cut the page out, or cut out the page, or cut out the picture, remove it using scissors. But when you say that an engine, for instance, cuts out, in which Since the verb is intransitive, used without an object, we say that the meaning of the verb, if the engine cuts out, this means that the engine or the motor stops working suddenly. Right, so this is regarding having a transitive phrasal verb versus having intransitive phrasal verb. And by the way, there is a very important remark that I'd like to point up to. All phrasal verbs have synonyms of other verbs which are not phrasal. What does that mean? Well, to understand this statement, we need to understand what a synonym is. A synonym is a word with the same meaning. So, for example, a word like broad and wide. Broad and wide. These are synonyms. A word like ancient and old. Ancient and old. These are synonyms. These are words with similar meanings, with very similar meanings. So you can have normal verbs or verbs which are not phrasal, synonymous to phrasal verbs. For example, there is a phrasal verb which is called mount up. Mount up. How do you spell mount? M-O-U-N-T. If something mounts up, this means it's increasing. So increase is not a phrasal verb. There is no preposition, there is no particle in it. Increase. But mount up is a phrasal verb because it has the particle up. So mount up is a phrasal verb and its synonym from normal verbs is increase. For example, you can say the company's debts are mounting up. The company's debts, which means that the company owes a lot of money to other companies or to other people. So the company's debts are mounting up, which means that the company's debts are increasing. So mount up is the phrasal verb. Increase is the verb which is not phrasal. Another example. I need to go over my lessons. I need to go over my lessons. What is the meaning of go over? Go over means revise or review. Do some revision on my lessons. So revise or review, these are not phrasal verbs. But the phrasal verb we're using in the sentence is go over. So go over, the phrasal verb, has a synonym of another verb which is not phrasal, and that's revise or review. Another example. Oh, this shirt has gone really tight. I need to let it out. Again, this shirt has gone really tight, which means that the shirt, I've gained some weight, so the shirt has become tighter on me. So if I let it out, this means that I enlarge it. I need to go to a tailor to enlarge the shirt for me. So let out is the phrasal verb. Enlarge is the verb which is not phrasal, and they have the same meaning. So what is the point I'm trying to make here? The point I'm trying to make is that any phrasal verb in English will have one or more synonyms of other verbs which are not phrasal. Examples, as we said, go over, revise. Mount up, increase. Let out, enlarge. So these are phrasal verbs on the left or on your right, and these are normal verbs which are verbs without any particles. Okay. Getting back to the point of having transitive and intransitive phrasal verbs, and specifically talking about having transitive phrasal verbs. Well, transitive phrasal verbs are phrasal verbs used with objects. So where should I place my object? Okay, as we said, your phrasal verb is composed of the main verb and one particle or two. Let's focus on the more common type of phrasal verbs, which is the main verb followed by only one particle. You put your object in two possible positions, either between the main verb and the particle or after the particle. So, for example, you can say, I want to try out the local food. I wanna, which is the spoken way of saying I want to, rather than saying I want to, you say I wanna. I wanna try out the local food. What is the object here? It's the local food. This is the object. So as you can see, in this form of the sentence, the object, the local form, is after the particle. We said, I wanna try out the local food. And you can also say, I wanna try the local food out. I wanna try the local food out. So in this example, the object, which is the local food, is placed between the main verb, try, and the particle or the preposition out. Right, so what is the lesson of this point? It's when you have an object with your phrasal verb, and this object is a noun or a noun phrase, it can be placed in two possible positions, either between the main verb and the particle. You can say try the local food out, or you can place your object after the particle by saying I want to try out the local food. Okay. What about if the object is a pronoun? What is a pronoun? A pronoun is a word like him, her, them, us, me. All of these are object pronouns, meaning that these these pronouns act as objects in a sentence. So if your object happens to be a pronoun, there is only one possible position for your object, and that's between the main verb and the particle. For example, I won't be able to go to the party. I won't be able, which I will not be able to go to the party. Count me out. If you say to someone, or if you ask someone to count you out, this means that you are not going to do this activity with them, and you're asking them to remove you from that activity. You're not going to join them in it, all right? So you tell them, I will not be able to go to the party. Count me out. What is the phrasal verb? Count out. Awesome. What is the object? Me. And me is a pronoun. You cannot say count out me. You cannot put the object when it's a pronoun after the particle. This position is not possible in this case. If your object is a pronoun, you are obliged, you are forced to put it between the main verb and the particle by saying count me out. You can't say count out me. So if you compare the two cases, we say that if your object is a noun, you can put it in two different positions, either between the verb and the particle or after the particle. But if your object is a pronoun, you are forced to put it in one position, and that's between the main verb and the particle. There is also another case in which you have to put the object after the particle, which is after the phrasal verb. When? That's when your object is very long. When your object is very long. For example, I must clean up the mess in the kitchen. So the kitchen is totally untidy. It's been untidy, and I have to clean it up, to put everything away, to put everything or tidy things away and clear them away and put everything in its right place, right? So I must clean up the mess in the kitchen. What is the object? It's the long phrase, the mess in the kitchen. That's a very long phrase. So in this case, when your object is a very long phrase, you have to place it after the particle. So you must say, I must clean up the mess in the kitchen. You can't say, I must clean the mess up or the mess in the kitchen up. You can't say that. That's totally unnatural because the object is very long and you need to place it after the particle. So you can't say, I must clean the mess in the kitchen up. That's totally unnatural. Because your object is long, which is the mess in the kitchen, put it after the particle. So the right way of saying it is, I must clean up the mess in the kitchen. Right. So if your object is a noun, you have two possible locations or two possible places for it. Between the main verb and the particle or after the particle. But if your object is so long, a very long noun phrase, you have only one location possible for it, and that's after the particle. And the same thing applies to the object which are pronouns. If your object is a pronoun, you must place it between the main verb and the pronoun. However, with some phrasal verbs, the object is a noun and you must put it between the main verb and the particle, which means the general rule, the rule of thumb, is that your object, if it's a noun, you can place it in two possible positions, either between the main verb or the particle or after the particle. However, with some phrasal verbs, you are forced to put the object in the middle position between the main verb and the particle, even if it's a noun. For example, you can say, I couldn't tell the twins apart. I couldn't tell the twins apart. Where is the phrasal verb? Tell apart. Where is the object? The twins. So the twins, that's not a pronoun, that's a noun, and it's not very long. The twins, just two words. So normally, you should say, tell apart the twins or tell the twins apart. No, because tell apart is one of those phrasal verbs that oblige you, that force you to put the object in the middle position between the main verb and the particle, right? In some other cases, with some other phrasal verbs, you have to put the object after the particle, even if it's a noun. For example, a very famous phrasal verb like take after. I talked about it at the beginning of the stream when I said take after means to look like, either in appearance or in personality, in morphology, external look, or in character and personality, okay? So, for example, you say, Sam takes after his father. Sam takes after his father. Where is the phrasal verb? Take after. Where is the object? His father. That's not a pronoun, that's a noun, and it's not very long. So normally, it should be placed in the middle position or in the end position. So normally I can say, Sam takes after his father, or Sam takes his father after. No, wrong. Take after is one of those phrasal verbs that force you to put the object after the preposition or the adverb or the particle, which is after. So you have only one choice, one option, one possibility in this example, which is saying Sam takes after his father. Although your object is a noun, which is father, you can't put it in the middle position and you have to place it in the position which is in the end, which is after the particle. So you say that Sam takes after his father. Awesome. How about the phrasal verbs which consist of three words? As we said earlier in the live stream, phrasal verbs are normally made of two words, one main verb plus one particle. But sometimes, with some cases, you have a phrasal verb which is composed of three words, a main verb and two particles after them. What do I do with the object in this case? Well, if you have a three-word phrasal verb, which means if your phrasal verb consists of the main verb and two particles, there is one possible location for your object, and that's at the end. At the end. So if your phrasal verb consists of three words, the main verb and two particles after it, you must put the object at the end position. So you say, he looks up to his brother. He looks up to his brother. Awesome. Where is the phrasal verb? Look up to. Two words or three words? Three words. Look up to. So you put the object in the end position by saying, he looks up to his brother. So his brother, that's the object. You put it after the verb and the particles. You can't say, he looks his brother up to. You cannot say, he looks up his brother too. That's completely rubbishy English, trashy English. It doesn't exist. So you have your phrasal verb composed of 3 words. That's the main verb and 2 particles after it. In 90% of the time, you will have to put the object in the end position after the second particle or after the 2 particles. Nevertheless, in some cases, with some 3-word phrasal verbs, it obliges you to put the object after the main verb immediately. For example, she tried to talk me out of the plan. Again, she tried to talk me out of the plan. Where is the phrasal verb? Talk out of. Talk out of. What is the meaning of this phrasal verb? It means persuade me or convince me not to do something. It means discourage me. That's the opposite of encourage. You encourage someone, you try to make them excited to do something. You discourage them, it means you make them excited not to do it, okay? So if somebody talks me out of something, this means that they try to persuade or to convince me not to do it. Awesome. So let's look at the example again. She tried to talk me out of the plan. Where is the object? It's me. It's the pronoun me. Where did we put it? We put it immediately after the main verb. The example says, she tried to talk me out of the plan. As you can see, the object, which is the pronoun me, is placed immediately after the main noun, after the main verb. So you can't say, she talked out me of the plan. You can't say that. And you can't say, she talked out of me the plan. All of this, again, is rubbishy English, trashy English. It doesn't exist, because with this particular phrasal verb, which is a 3-word phrasal verb composed of the main verb and 2 particles, you are obliged, you're forced to place your object after the main verb immediately. So the right way of saying it is, she tried to talk me out of the plan. Talk, that's the main verb. Me, that's the object. And then out of, which is the rest of the phrasal verb or the 2 particles coming in it. Right, so let's recapitulate briefly on all what we have said in this lesson. A phrasal verb is different from a normal verb. Your normal verb is your verb alone without using any other words with it. Work, play, stay, run, all of these are normal verb. But when work changes into work out, when stay changes into stay up, when run changes into run out of, all of these changes are giving rise to phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are the verbs followed by 1 particle or 2 particles. Most of the time, it's only 1 particle, means 1 word, a preposition or an adverb. And sometimes it's followed by 2 particles. In this case, they will have a preposition and an adverb. Sometimes your phrasal verb is literal, which means that you can guess the meaning of it. In some other cases, your phrasal verbs are figurative or metaphorical, meaning that you cannot guess their meanings. The meaning of the phrasal verb will be completely different to the meaning of the main verb forming it. Phrasal verbs, just like all other verbs, can be transitive or intransitive, which means that they can be used with an object as a transitive verb or without an object as an intransitive verb. Sometimes some phrasal verbs can be used transitively and intransitively. You can have an object with them or you don't have an object. Both cases work. Sometimes the meaning is the same, so the transitive version of the phrasal verb has the same meaning of the intransitive version, and in some other cases, the meaning will be different. So the transitive form of the phrasal verb will have a different meaning to the intransitive form of it. Talking of transitive phrasal verbs, these are the phrasal verbs used with objects. Normally, if your object is a noun, you have two possible positions for it, either between the verb and the particle or after the particle. However, if your object is a pronoun or is a long noun phrase, you are obliged to put it in one position. If it's a pronoun, you are forced to put the object between the main verb and the particle. And if your object is long, you are forced to put it after the particle. That's in case of phrasal verbs which are composed of two words, the main verb and the particle after it. With three-word phrasal verbs, these are the phrasal verbs that are composed of the main verb and two particles after it. Normally, and in 90% of the cases, you are required to put your object after the two particles, after the whole phrasal verbs. But in some rare cases, you need to put your object immediately after the main verb and before the two particles of the phrasal verb. What I have explained in this live lesson is almost everything about phrasal verbs. These are all the rules and regulations that control this lesson. What you need to do is using your vocabulary notebook, because this lesson is not exactly grammar, it's mixed up, it's grammar and vocabulary together. So what you need to do now, after understanding and assimilating all the rules of phrasal verbs or the grammar of it, what you need to do is to jot down, which means to take notes of any phrasal verb that you bump into, any phrasal verb that you come across. Because the fact of the matter is that, as I said at the beginning of the live stream, phrasal verbs are extensively used by native speakers, either in spoken English or in written English. So it's paramount to incorporate, it's very important to include them in your speech and in your writing to raise the standard of your command of English, and it becomes comparable and it becomes compatible with native English. Other than that, you will always be sounding like a non-native person to native speakers, and they will always not interact with you or get on along or get on well with you, because the better your English is, the easier your communication will be with native speakers. And here I come to the end of today's live lesson. I hope it was useful for you. I hope you enjoyed it. And as usual, I want to reiterate my invitation. If my content, if the content I provide or I present is appealing to you, please like the content, share it, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments down below in the comment box. Whether your comment is a suggestion, is a remark, I take care that I read all the comments that come to me. And as I said, this group or this series of live lessons will be covering a wide range of grammatical topics. We will be talking about prepositions in our next 1 or 2 live streams, and after that we'll go back to our series about English tenses. We have already covered 4 tenses so far. We talked about the past continuous, past simple, present continuous, and present simple. So we have already covered these 4 tenses before. My plan is that when I get back to my series about English tenses, I will be covering the present perfect. That's one of the most important tenses in English. It's used on a wide scale. Although it's more common in British English, maybe Americans don't use it much. Some of them do, of course, but they are more inclined to use the past simple rather than the present perfect. So after I get done with the upcoming 1 or 2 live streams, which will be tackling the topic of prepositions, which is a very complex topic in the language, I will be getting back to the series about English tenses and tackle the tense of the present perfect, which is perplexing for most of English learners or most of English students. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I give a live stream or a live lesson on a daily basis, so every day there will be a live lesson. Stay tuned for the upcoming live lesson tomorrow, and take care of yourselves, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.